I woke with the bitter taste of fear in my mouth. My heart was pounding. The ceiling above me wasn't the familiar off-white I stared at every morning. It was a yawning expanse of gray, smeared with the faint orange of a rising sun. Cold air bit at my skin. I sat up quickly, clutching at my chest as if I could physically restrain the terror clawing its way up my throat. The ground beneath me was damp dirt, not my bed. I blinked, rubbing my hands over the stubble on my face, trying to make sense of the scene. Rows of cornstalks stretched endlessly around me, their dry leaves rattling softly in the wind. A cornfield. Where the hell was I? My hands trembled as I fished my phone out of my pocket. No signal. The time read 5:43 a.m. I stared at the screen, trying to remember how I'd gotten here, but my mind was a complete blank. The last thing I could recall was falling asleep in my bed the night before, exhausted after a long day at work. I stood shakily, my legs stiff and sore as if I'd been walking for hours. My shoes were caked with mud, the fabric ripped in places, and my socks were soaked through. My hands weren't much better, scratched and dirty with dried blood crusting around my nails. A shiver ran down my spine as I stared at them. Had I been in a fight? I glanced around the cornfield, half expecting to find some grotesque evidence of violence. Bloodied clothing, a weapon, a body. But there was nothing. Just me, my ragged clothes, and an overwhelming sense of unease. Get it together, I muttered to myself, my voice sounding hollow and strange in the empty field. I didn't feel hurt, at least not seriously. My chest ached from the cold, and my feet stung, but there were no bruises or broken bones. Just the gnawing confusion of waking up somewhere I shouldn't be. I started walking, limping slightly as the blisters on my feet protested every step. Eventually, I reached the edge of the field and spotted a paved road. Relief flooded my chest at the sight of a gas station sign in the distance. It took me nearly half an hour to limp my way there, and by the time I arrived, I was soaked in sweat despite the chill. The attendant behind the counter gave me a wary look as I stepped inside. I could see my reflection in the glass door, disheveled hair, mud streaked on my face, and dark circles under my eyes. I looked like a man who hadn't slept in weeks. "Rough night?" the attendant asked, his tone guarded. "Something like that," I said, avoiding his gaze as I grabbed a bottle of water and some antiseptic wipes. My voice felt raw, like I'd been screaming, though I didn't remember making a sound. I paid for the items in cash, thank God I still had my wallet, and stepped back outside, scrubbing at the dirt on my hands and face with shaky fingers. My mind raced as I tried to piece together what had happened. Sleepwalking? That was the only explanation I could think of, but it didn't make sense. I'd never sleepwalked before in my life. The walk home took hours. When I finally reached my apartment, I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. My legs were jelly, and my feet throbbed with every step. I stripped off my muddy clothes and collapsed onto the couch, staring blankly at the ceiling as the events of the morning replayed in my mind. It wasn't just the disorientation that scared me. It was the growing realization that this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. The signs had been there for weeks, maybe longer. Small, inexplicable things I'd brushed off as stress or forgetfulness. My shoes would be muddy in the morning even though I hadn't gone outside. The TV remote would end up in the kitchen, or my phone would show a long walk logged on its GPS, even though I swore I'd been home all night. Neighbors had started making strange comments too. Mrs. Blakely from 2 doors down had stopped me in the hallway one morning to ask if I'd enjoyed my midnight stroll. I'd laughed it off at the time, but her words stuck with me. Midnight stroll. I hadn't hadn't left my apartment that night. Had I? Even Sophia, the barista at the coffee shop I visited every morning, had started to notice. "You look like death warmed over," she'd said a few days ago, sliding my usual black coffee across the counter. Her tone had been joking, but her eyes were full of concern. "You sleeping okay, man?" "Yeah, fine," I'd lied, brushing her off. But the truth was, I hadn't been fine for a while. That morning in the cornfield had been the last straw. I couldn't keep ignoring it. Something was wrong, and I needed answers. That night, I set up cameras around my apartment. It felt ridiculous, like something out of a bad paranormal movie. But I didn't know what else to do. If I really was sleepwalking, I needed proof. I placed one camera in the living room, one in the kitchen, and one facing my bedroom door. Then I double-checked the locks on all the windows and doors before climbing into bed. My chest was tight with anxiety, my thoughts racing as I stared at the ceiling. When sleep finally came, it dragged me under like a riptide. I woke the next morning feeling worse than ever. My body ached like I'd been hit by a car, and my mouth was dry as sandpaper. Dread pooled in my stomach as I reached for my phone to check the footage. The first video showed nothing out of the ordinary, just me tossing and turning in bed. But the second clip, from the kitchen camera, made my blood run cold. At 2:17 a.m., I appeared on screen, walking stiffly into the kitchen. My movements were jerky, almost mechanical, and my head hung at an odd angle, like a puppet with its strings cut. I opened the silverware drawer, rummaged through it for a moment, then grabbed something. What? I couldn't tell. My hand blocked the camera's view. Then I turned and walked out of frame, leaving the drawer open. My stomach churned as I scrubbed through the footage, desperate to see where I'd gone. The living room camera showed me standing in the middle of the room, staring at the blank TV screen. My lips moved, but there was no sound. I leaned closer, squinting at the screen. Was I talking to someone? A chill ran down my spine as I noticed something else. At one point, I turned toward the camera, my face partially illuminated by the dim glow from the streetlight outside. My eyes looked wrong. They weren't glazed over like I'd expect from a sleepwalker. They were wide open, alert, almost aware. I shut off the video and sat back on the couch, my hands trembling. Something was happening to me, something I couldn't explain, and I had a sinking feeling it was only going to get worse. The next few nights were hell. I'd thought waking up in the cornfield was bad, but it turned out to be just the beginning. Whatever was happening to me was getting worse, and fast. The first incident happened 2 nights later. I woke up to the deafening roar of a car horn, my body rigid with fear. Blinding headlights barreled toward me, and I stumbled back just in time, falling onto the asphalt as the car swerved to avoid hitting me. For a moment, all I could do was lie there, my chest heaving, my heart hammering so loudly I thought it might burst. I was on a highway, a busy highway. The roar of passing cars was deafening, and the cool night air cut through my thin t-shirt. My bare feet stung against the rough surface of the road, and I realized I was trembling uncontrollably. Somehow I managed to drag myself off the pavement to the grassy shoulder. My hands were scraped raw, my knees shaking so badly I could barely stand. I had no idea how I'd gotten there. The last thing I remembered was falling asleep in my bed, the cameras positioned around the apartment still rolling. This wasn't normal sleepwalking. It couldn't be. I tried not to think about it, chalking it up to a fluke. Maybe my anxiety had pushed me over the edge, triggering something I didn't fully understand. But the next time, there was no denying that this was something far worse. A few days later, I woke up teetering on the edge of a rooftop. The wind whipped around me, icy and sharp. I could see the entire city spread out below, glittering under the pale light of the moon. My stomach lurched as I glanced down at the street, so far below that the people in cars looked like toys. My feet were inches from the ledge, my balance precarious. One wrong move, one gust of wind, and I'd be a smear on the sidewalk. I didn't dare move. My legs felt like jelly, my arms outstretched instinctively as if to steady myself. My breathing was ragged, and my chest heaved with each gasping breath. It took what felt like an eternity to shuffle back from the edge, each step feeling like I might slip and fall at any moment. When I finally reached the rooftop door, it was locked. I had no idea how I'd gotten up there, or how I was going to get down. By the time I managed to make my way back home, I was a wreck. My entire body ached, and I hadn't stopped trembling since the rooftop incident. The lack of sleep was taking a toll on me, and it was obvious to everyone around me. Even Sophia noticed. "Rough morning?" she asked one day as I shuffled into the coffee shop, my head pounding and my eyes bloodshot. "You could say that," I muttered, not meeting her gaze. She frowned, sliding my coffee across the counter. "You okay, Liam? You've been looking, I don't know, off lately." "I'm fine," I said quickly, though I could tell she didn't believe me. Her brow furrowed as she studied me. "I saw you the other night," she said casually, but there was a note of curiosity in her voice. I froze. "What?" "Yeah," she said, tilting her head. "I was heading home from a friend's place and saw you standing outside this boarded-up house across town. Looked like you were staring at it or something. You didn't say anything when I waved, though." I stared at her, my mind reeling. I hadn't been anywhere near that part of town, or at least I didn't think I had. "It wasn't me," I said finally, my voice hollow. Sophia gave me a look that said she didn't believe me, but she didn't push the issue. "Okay," she said, shrugging. "If you say so." A few days later, I noticed it. It was small at first, barely more than a red dot on the back of my neck. I only found it because I'd been scratching at the area. It had been itching for days, though I hadn't thought much of it. But the itching got worse, and the tiny mark didn't heal. If anything, it started to look more irritated, a faint ring of red forming around it. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was just a bug bite or a pimple. But the more I scratched, the worse it got. The skin around it felt swollen and tender, and I started to notice a faint, almost imperceptible sensation under my skin. It was subtle, like something just barely moving, but it was enough to make my stomach churn. By now, reviewing the footage from my cameras had become a nightly ritual. I'd watch myself sleep, looking for any clues about what was happening to me. That night, I found more than I'd bargained for. Around 3 a.m., I appeared on the bedroom camera, my body stiff and jerky as I sat up in bed. My head hung at an unnatural angle, and my hands moved with uncanny precision. Then, without warning, I reached back and began scratching at the back of my neck. The motion was frantic, almost violent, as though I was trying to dig something out of my skin. My fingers clawed at the area until the skin was raw, but my expression didn't change. I didn't wince, didn't react to the pain. I just kept digging, my lips moving soundlessly. When I finally stopped, My hand came away covered in blood. I stared at the screen, horrified, as I watched myself stand up and leave the room, the camera following my back as I walked stiffly toward the door. The video ended there. The next day, I went to see a doctor. I told him I'd been scratching at a bug bite, trying to downplay the situation as much as possible. He didn't seem convinced. "This doesn't look like a typical insect bite," he said, frowning as he examined the wound. "You said this has been itching for how long?" "A few days," I lied, trying to keep my voice steady. He nodded slowly, his brow furrowed. "It's unusual, to say the least. I don't see any sign of infection, but the tissue around it looks inflamed, almost like a foreign object might be causing irritation." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "A foreign object? It's just a possibility," he said quickly, but his tone didn't reassure me. "I could order some imaging if you'd like, but honestly, it's probably nothing to worry about." I nodded mutely, barely hearing him. That night, as I stared at the wound in the mirror, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was wrong. This wasn't nothing. Something was inside me. I couldn't deny it anymore. I wasn't just sleepwalking. I was being used. Every night my body was being hijacked, and every morning I was left with less of myself. I downloaded a GPS tracking app to map my movements while I slept. I set it to run every night, leaving my phone in my pocket as I went to bed. The next morning, I woke up with the same hollow exhaustion that had become my norm. But this time, I had something tangible to investigate. The app showed I'd walked nearly 10 miles during the night. The route wasn't random. It zigzagged across the city, stopping at specific locations. An empty lot, an overpass, a park. But it wasn't until I overlaid the map with local news reports that the pieces started falling into place. Each stop corresponded to a crime scene. A string of mysterious disappearances and violent assaults had been plaguing the area for weeks, and I was walking straight to them. The worst part was that I didn't know why. A few nights later, I woke up mid-sleepwalk. The first thing I noticed was the cold metal in my hand. The second was the sickeningly sticky sensation of blood. I was standing in the backyard of a house I didn't recognize. The faint glow of the porch light casting long shadows across the unkempt lawn. In my hand was a heavy wrench, its surface smeared with blood that glistened darkly in the pale light. Panic surged through me as I dropped the wrench, my breath coming in shallow gasps. My mind raced as I wiped my hands on my shirt, smearing the blood, but failing to remove it. The back door of the house was slightly ajar. I didn't dare step inside, but I couldn't bring myself to leave either. I stood frozen, staring at the doorway, half expecting someone or something to emerge. When I finally worked up the courage to run, I didn't stop until I was back in my apartment, slamming the door shut and locking it behind me. My heart felt like it might burst as I leaned against the door, sliding down to the floor. I couldn't keep going like this. I tried everything to stay awake. Energy drinks, coffee, cold showers. I even resorted to slapping myself across the face whenever I felt my eyelids droop. But it didn't matter. My body was betraying me, pulling me under no matter how hard I fought. The exhaustion started bleeding into my waking hours. I'd catch myself zoning out, losing minutes, sometimes hours, without realizing it. Once I found myself standing in the middle of my kitchen, clutching a knife with no memory of how I'd gotten there. Hallucinations followed, shadows that flickered just out of sight, whispers that seemed to come from the walls, and a persistent sensation of being watched. My apartment became a prison. each corner filled with unseen threats. And through it all, the itching on the back of my neck grew worse. I couldn't take it anymore. The thing in my neck, whatever it was, had to come out. I sat in front of the bathroom mirror, a razor blade trembling in my hand. The fluorescent light buzzed faintly, casting harsh shadows over my face. My eyes were bloodshot, sunken, almost unrecognizable. "Just do it," I whispered to myself. "It's in there. You have to get it out." I took a deep breath, tilted my head to the side, and pressed the blade against the swollen red skin. Pain shot through me as I dragged the blade across the puncture wound, but I gritted my teeth and kept going. Blood welled up, warm and slick, running down my neck and staining my shirt. And then I saw it. Something small and black wriggled beneath the surface, darting away from the blade as if it knew what I was trying to do. My stomach churned and bile rose in my throat, but I didn't stop. I dug deeper, the blade slicing through skin and muscle, until I finally caught a glimpse of it. A tiny, insect-like creature, its body glistening with blood. Before I could pull it out, my vision blurred, and a wave of dizziness crashed over me. I collapsed onto the bathroom floor, the razor slipping from my hand as darkness swallowed me whole. I woke up hours later, sprawled on the cold tile. My neck throbbed with pain, and my shirt was soaked with blood. I staggered to my feet, clutching the edge of the sink for support, and looked in the mirror. The wound was partially healed, the skin pink and raw but no longer bleeding. Pinned to my chest was a piece of paper, smeared with my own blood. In my handwriting it read, "You can't stop it." I didn't leave my apartment after that. I couldn't. The outside world was too dangerous, too full of questions I didn't want answers to. I turned my apartment into a fortress. I bolted the windows shut, reinforced the door, and set up makeshift traps to keep myself inside at night. But no matter what I did, it didn't make a difference. I still woke up in strange places, covered in mud or blood or worse. One morning, I found myself sitting on my couch, my hands trembling as I held an unfamiliar cell phone. The screen displayed a set of coordinates, the numbers glowing ominously in the dim light of the room. I tried to throw the phone away, but my hands refused to obey. It was as if some invisible force was guiding me, compelling me to hold on to it. The days blurred together after that. I stopped eating, stopped sleeping. The apartment became a tomb filled with shadows and whispers I couldn't escape. I started talking to myself, though the words didn't feel like my own. They came unbidden, spilling from my lips in a voice I barely recognized. The phone buzzed again, another set of coordinates flashing on the screen. I didn't want to go. I didn't want to know what was waiting for me. But my body was no longer my own. I stood mechanically, the phone clutched tightly in my hand, and walked to the door. The last thing I heard before stepping outside was my own voice, low and vacant, whispering the same phrase over and over. "You can't stop it." I was so tired I thought I might dissolve. That was the word that kept floating to the front of my sleep-deprived mind as I wiped down the coffee counter for what felt like the 100th time that day. Dissolve. Like sugar into hot water. Like me into the endless, grinding monotony of shifts at a job that didn't care if I lived or died, so long as I could pour lattes and smile at customers who didn't bother to smile back. The smell of burnt espresso was everywhere, inescapable. It clung to my hair, my clothes, my skin. I couldn't even tell if it was real anymore, or if it had seeped into my very being, an olfactory reminder of where I spent every miserable waking hour. "Hey, Sophia." My coworker Marie tapped me on the shoulder, pulling me from my thoughts. "You're zoning out again. Everything okay?" I blinked at her, trying to focus. Her face was blurry, like she was standing behind a fogged-up window. "Yeah," I mumbled, even though we both knew it wasn't true. She frowned but didn't push it. "All right. Just don't forget to restock the napkins before you clock out." I nodded absently and returned to scrubbing the counter. My hands felt disconnected from the rest of me, moving automatically while my brain floated somewhere far away. Sleep deprivation did that, split me into pieces, like my body and mind couldn't agree on how to function anymore. I hadn't had a full night's sleep in weeks, maybe months. The worst part was that no one seemed to notice how bad it had gotten. Not my coworkers, not the customers, not even my manager. They saw the dark circles under my eyes, the tremble in my hands, the way I flinched at loud noises. But they all chalked it up to working too hard, or being young. They didn't see the graveyard my apartment had become. When I got home after my shift that night, I kicked off my shoes and surveyed the mess around me. Empty bottles of melatonin and antihistamines cluttered the nightstand. Crumpled prescriptions for sedatives I'd been too scared to fill littered the floor. Herbal teas lined the counter in the kitchen, unopened or half-used, their promises of soothing sleep mocking me. I stepped over a pile of laundry and collapsed onto the couch, letting my head fall back against the worn cushions. The weight of exhaustion pressed down on me, heavy and suffocating. I'd tried everything: melatonin, tinctures, over-the-counter sleeping pills, mixing alcohol with antihistamines to knock myself out. Nothing worked, or if it did, it didn't last. The memory of last night came rushing back, unbidden. I'd taken 2 sleeping pills with a shot of whiskey, desperate for even a few hours of oblivion. At some point I must have fallen asleep sitting upright, because I jolted awake gasping for air, my throat tight and my chest heaving. For one terrifying moment I thought I was choking, on my own vomit, my tongue, something. But when I clawed at my throat, there was nothing there. Just the lingering acidic taste of bile and the racing thought that if I'd stayed asleep a moment longer, I might not have woken up at all. The fear still lingered, coiled tight in my chest like a snake. I stared at the ceiling, my eyes too dry to cry, and muttered to no one, "I can't keep living like this." The next day was worse. I was so tired I couldn't focus on anything. Customers complained that I was too slow. My manager barked at me to get it together, and Marie kept shooting me worried glances that made me want to scream. When my shift finally ended, I practically ran out the door, eager to get away from the fluorescent lights and the endless stream of demands. The cold night air hit me like a slap, and I shivered, hugging my coat tighter around me as I started the long walk home. That's when I saw it. The shop seemed to appear out of nowhere, tucked between 2 closed storefronts I could have sworn had been vacant yesterday. Its windows were dimly lit, a soft glow spilling out onto the sidewalk. Curiosity tugged at me, or maybe it was desperation. Either way, I found myself pushing the door open before I even realized what I was doing. A bell jingled softly as I stepped inside, and the scent of lavender and sage enveloped me, soothing and strangely comforting. Shelves lined the walls, filled with jars of powders, dried herbs, and unlabeled bottles. "Good evening." The voice startled me, and I turned to see an older woman standing behind a wooden counter. Her presence was unnerving, though I couldn't quite say why. She had a calm, almost serene expression, her dark eyes studying me intently. "You look like you need help," she said, her tone gentle but firm. I hesitated, glancing around the shop. "I don't know. You're tired," she said simply, cutting through my uncertainty. The words hit me like a physical blow. I nodded, unable to stop myself. She reached under the counter and pulled out a small jar, its contents hidden behind the dark glass. "This will quiet your mind and give you the sleep you need," she said, pushing it toward me. "Just 1 cup before bed. No more." I stared at the jar, unsure whether to believe her. "What is it?" "It doesn't matter," she said with a faint smile. "What matters is that it works." My first instinct was to turn her down, to tell her I didn't believe in magic cures. But then I thought about the sleepless nights, the choking fear, the graveyard of remedies that hadn't worked. "What if it doesn't?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The woman's smile didn't falter. "It will." I took the jar. That night I brewed the tea, its earthy aroma filling my tiny apartment. The liquid was dark and slightly bitter, the taste lingering on my tongue long after I swallowed the last sip. I climbed into bed, half expecting it to do nothing, like every other remedy I'd tried. Instead, sleep came almost instantly, pulling me under like a warm wave. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, I didn't dream. I didn't toss or turn. I didn't wake up gasping for air or clutching at my chest. When I opened my eyes the next morning, I felt rested. Not just rested. I felt alive. The thought was almost enough to make me cry. The first few nights after I started drinking the tea were pure bliss. I'd brew a cup before bed, sip it slowly, and feel the tension melt away as sleep overtook me. For the first time in what felt like forever, I woke up feeling rested. The dark circles under my eyes began to fade, and the trembling in my hands stopped. My thoughts felt sharper at work, and even my co-worker Marie noticed the change. "You're looking better, Sophia," she said one morning, handing me an order slip. "Whatever you're doing, keep it up." I smiled weakly, not trusting myself to say more. But as the days turned into weeks, the tea became more than a solution. It became a necessity. At first, the changes were subtle. I woke up one morning with a pounding headache, the kind that felt like a vice tightening around my skull. I blamed it on dehydration and drank more water. The next night, I woke up drenched in sweat, my sheets sticking to my skin. My chest felt tight, like a weight was pressing down on me, and I gasped for air, my heart racing. It passed quickly, but the fear lingered. By the end of the week, my breathing during the night had grown shallow, as if my body was forgetting how to inhale. I'd wake up panicked, my lungs straining, my throat dry and raw. Then came the night I woke up unable to move. I'd been dreaming, or at least I thought I had. A strange, shapeless figure hovered over me, its shadow stretching across my room. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My limbs were heavy, pinned to the mattress as though I were sinking into it. When I finally jolted awake, the figure was gone, but the sensation of its presence lingered. The tea was no longer giving me the same restful sleep it once had, but I couldn't stop drinking it. Whenever I tried to skip a night, I lay awake for hours, my mind racing, my body restless. I started drinking it earlier in the evening, brewing it stronger in the hopes of reclaiming the peace it had once given me. Instead, the side effects only intensified. I began noticing bruises on my arms when I woke up, dark and circular, as if I'd been gripping something tightly in my sleep. My tongue felt swollen during the day, and I occasionally tasted blood when I swallowed. Marie commented on faint scratches on my neck one morning at work. "What happened there?" she asked, pointing as she handed me a cup of coffee. I touched my neck, wincing at the sting. "I don't know," I said, though my mind raced with possibilities. Her eyebrows knitted together. "You should get that checked out. It looks weird." The words stuck with me, gnawing at the edges of my thoughts. The blackout started not long after. I'd wake up in strange positions, my body stiff and aching. One morning, I found myself sitting upright on the couch, clutching my empty mug as though I'd fallen asleep mid-drink. Another time, I woke up lying on the bathroom floor, my face pressed against the cold tile. My throat burned, and my chest felt heavy, as if I'd been coughing in my sleep. The worst was when I woke up hanging off the edge of my bed, my airway partially blocked by the mattress. I gasped for breath, choking, my lungs desperate for air. I started setting alarms throughout the night, hoping to catch myself before I blacked out completely. It didn't work. Desperate for answers, I set up my phone to record myself while I slept. I propped it on the nightstand, the camera aimed at my bed, and hit record before drinking the tea and climbing under the covers. The next morning, I woke up feeling worse than ever. My body ached, my throat was raw, and my sheets were soaked with sweat. I grabbed my phone, dreading what I might see. The footage was horrifying. At 3:14 a.m., my breathing grew shallow, then stopped entirely for nearly 2 minutes. My chest didn't rise or fall. I just lay there, still as a corpse, until I suddenly gasped, my body jerking violently. Later in the video, my body convulsed slightly, as if struggling to wake up. My hands twitched, clenching and unclenching around the sheets. The most disturbing part came near the end. At 4:06 a.m., my eyes fluttered open. They didn't look like mine. They were unfocused, glassy, and wide with something I couldn't name. My lips moved soundlessly, forming words I couldn't hear. I turned off the video, my stomach churning. Something was wrong. Deeply, horribly wrong. I dug through my trash, searching for the tea's packaging. I needed to know what I'd been drinking, what I'd let into my body. At the bottom of the jar, hidden beneath a layer of dried leaves, I found it. A faint, handwritten note. Do not exceed the recommended dose. Side effects include disorientation, memory loss, and dependency. The last word was underlined. That night I decided not to drink the tea. The withdrawal hit fast and hard. By 3 a.m. I was vomiting uncontrollably, black viscous liquid spilling from my mouth and splattering onto the bathroom floor. The smell was sharp and metallic, tinged with the faint bitterness of the tea. I clung to the toilet, too weak to stand, my body trembling with the effort of expelling whatever was inside me. My throat burned, and my vision blurred, but I couldn't stop. When I finally collapsed onto the floor, my chest heaving, I drifted into a fitful sleep. In my dreams, I was drowning. Black liquid filled my lungs, heavy and suffocating, while something slimy and alive coiled around my limbs, dragging me deeper into the darkness. The next morning, I stumbled into the shop, clutching the jar of tea in one hand. My hair was unwashed, my clothes rumpled, and I could barely stand. The shopkeeper looked up as I entered, her expression calm and unreadable. "You didn't follow the instructions, did you?" she said, her tone almost amused. "What the hell is this?" I demanded, slamming the jar onto the counter. My voice was hoarse, barely more than a croak. The woman tilted her head, her lips curving into a faint smile. "It's what you asked for." "You lied to me," I spat. "You said it would help me sleep. You didn't say it would." "Would what?" she interrupted. Her voice was soft but carried an edge of steel. "Would make you feel rested. Would quiet your mind." "It's killing me," I shouted, my hands trembling. The woman laughed softly, the sound low and chilling. "It's not the tea, my dear. It's you. You've always been your own worst enemy." Her words struck a nerve, and I took a step back, my chest tight with anger and fear. "I'm going to the police," I said, my voice shaking. The woman's smile widened. "And what will you tell them?" she asked. "That a tea gave you the best sleep of your life?" She leaned closer, her dark eyes boring into mine. "Go ahead. Tell them. Let's see how that works out for you." I turned and stumbled out of the shop, her laughter following me into the cold, gray morning. I threw the tea jar into the trash as soon as I got home. It clattered to the bottom of the bin, and I slammed the lid shut, as if trapping it would somehow rid me of its hold. The shopkeeper's voice echoed in my mind. "You didn't follow the instructions, did you?" I wouldn't drink it again. I couldn't. Whatever the tea was doing to me, it wasn't worth it. The first night without it was unbearable. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the hours dragging by like years. My body ached, my muscles twitching involuntarily as though they were trying to expel something from within. My chest felt heavy, like a weight was pressing down on me, and every breath was a struggle. At some point I started feeling things that weren't there. Fingers brushing against my arms, a hand pressing gently against my throat. The sensation was so vivid that I clawed at my skin, gasping for air, only to find myself alone in the dark. The second night was worse. My throat felt raw, and every cough brought up flecks of black that stained the tissue I held. The metallic tang lingered in my mouth, making me gag. My reflection in the mirror became a stranger. Pale, gaunt, bloodshot eyes staring back at me with a faint smirk, as if mocking my suffering. By the third night, I was hallucinating. I saw shadows moving in the corners of my apartment, heard whispers that seemed to come from the walls. My body shook with fevered chills, and I couldn't keep anything down. Not water, not food. I spent most of the night curled up on the bathroom floor, trembling and praying for it to end. On the fourth night, I gave in. My hands shook as I fished the tea jar out of the trash. It was dented but intact, the faint scent of the leaves wafting up as I opened it. My stomach churned at the thought of drinking it again, but the desperation outweighed my fear. I brewed a weak cup, the water barely darkened by the tea, and sat at the kitchen table, cradling the mug in my hands. "I just need to sleep," I whispered to no one. The first sip was bitter, the taste of relief and dread mingling on my tongue. I drank it all, my body trembling, and stumbled back to bed. The tea worked almost immediately, dragging me into the familiar, dreamless void. I woke up choking. My throat burned, bile rising as I gasped for air. My arms and legs ached, the skin tender and bruised as though I'd been restrained. My sheets were soaked with sweat, and my chest heaved with every ragged breath. I staggered to the bathroom, clutching the sink for support as I looked at myself in the mirror. My reflection was a ghost, the dark circles under my eyes deeper than ever. My hair was plastered to my forehead, my skin pale and clammy. I lifted my arm, staring at the deep purple bruises around my wrists. Finger-shaped bruises. I didn't drink the tea again. The detox left me weak, my body frail and trembling. I couldn't sleep for more than an hour at a time, and when I did, I woke up gasping for air, my heart pounding as though I'd been drowning. I started using a sleep monitor app to track my nights, desperate for some sense of control. One morning, I woke up groggy and disoriented, my chest heaving as if I'd stopped breathing in my sleep. The app sent me a notification. Warning: 6 interruptions detected. Potential sleep apnea. I listened to the recordings, dread pooling in my stomach as I heard myself gasping and choking throughout the night. But that wasn't all. In the background, faint but unmistakable, were murmurs. Low, unintelligible whispers that sent chills down my spine. I deleted the recordings, too terrified to listen again. I survived, but I wasn't the same. Every morning my throat felt raw, as if I'd spent the night screaming. My chest ached constantly, and I was haunted by the memory of the tea and what it had done to me. I refused to touch sleep aids again. Even the sight of melatonin bottles at the store made my stomach twist with nausea. Instead, I became obsessed with tracking my sleep. I set alarms, used multiple monitors, and kept a journal of every restless hour. It didn't matter that I rarely slept more than a few hours a night. I couldn't risk losing awareness. Any lapse in vigilance felt like an invitation for something to come back. Weeks passed, and the tea began to feel like a distant nightmare. I convinced myself it was over, that I was free. One afternoon, I stopped by the pharmacy to pick up some ibuprofen for the lingering aches in my body. As I wandered the aisles, my eyes fell on a shelf of over-the-counter sleeping pills. For a moment I stood frozen, staring at the bottles. Maybe just one, I thought, just to take the edge off. My hand hovered over the shelf, reaching for a bottle, when a voice stopped me cold. "You came back, didn't you?" I spun around, my heart hammering in my chest. The aisle was empty. My breath caught as I scanned the store, searching for the source of the voice. But there was no one there. I grabbed the bottle of ibuprofen and left without looking back, the faint echo of the shopkeeper's voice lingering in my mind. "You came back, didn't you?"